Welcome back. And so I'm going to take a look here. The rest of chapter 7 is valuation. There's a lot of math in this chapter at the end. And we really haven't had much of any so far, but here there's a lot of math at the end. And so I wanted to do an introduction of stock valuation just to get us started. So what I'll do on this little video is I'll introduce valuing preferred stock, and then I'll introduce valuing common stock, which is expected to continue on with a constant growth rate. And what we find is when we look at common stocks over the past several years, many years, we find that some of them, not all, have a constant growth rate in the dividend. In other words, the dividend goes up during the past by approximately a certain percentage each year. Like every year, Johnson & Johnson increases its dividend by about 3%. So if somebody gets got a dollar dividend last year, this year her dividend is going to be like $1.03, 3% higher, given a 3% rate. So let's take a look. We'll start with preferred stock valuation. We find the present value of all future dividends. Well, that's why Chapter 5 came before this, because we're going to need to find present value, think in those terms. So what's the value of a stock? Well, it's the present value of all the dividends it's expected to pay. If I wanted to value my own life, I could look at all the income I expect to make throughout the end of my life, including my retirement, and calculate the present value of that and assign that as a value of my life. It's one way to value my life is the present value of my future earnings. So that, and if I want to value a company, we'll see later on in the chapter, we find the present value of all the cash flow it's expected to generate for bond and stockholders. And so, but here we're on a preferred stock, and we're going to try to find the present value of all future dividends. We're going to use the perpetuity formula from Chapter 5, Time Value of Money, and that's why that was in there. A big reason that was in there is that we're going to use it now. The dividend is never expected to change. For instance, $2.50 a year. Some stocks pay different. That's just an example. And the dividend is never expected to end. Ownership doesn't end. A bond, that matures, it ends, but ownership doesn't end. The person who owns the ownership will die, and pass, but the ownership continues on. They pass it on. So a dividend is never expected to end. It goes on in perpetuity. So the given information, we'll do an example. A preferred stock, for instance, pays $2.80 dividend each year. We feel an appropriate return on the stock is 8%. In other words, when I think about buying it, I think, yeah, I'll buy that stock given it returns 8%. So I really want to know what price of a stock, what price should the stock sell for so that I get 8%, so that the $2.80 dividend is 8%. So we may call the appropriate return on the stock, or fair return, a required return. We often refer to that as a required return. My requirement is that stock yields 8%. That's my required return. My boss, she might want a 9% return. She'd do different math than I'll do here. So we'll take a look. The formula is simple, very simple. And we've seen it because you've done perpetuities before. So preferred stock valuation. The dividend is $2.80. Notice D with a little O. O means this year or now or in the present time. The dividend now this year is $2.80. The required return, that's the RS, the required return on the stock is 8%. So I'm using the same information from the last slide in my example. And I take the price of the stock, and that equals the annual dividend divided by the required return. What could be easier than that? You're given two numbers, $2.80 and 8%. You do have to express the percentage as a decimal, and you figure out the price of the stock. It's $2.80 divided by 0.08 is $35 a share. That stock is worth $35 a share. We believe it's worth $35 per share. We could also say the present value of receiving $2.80 a year forever is $35. So let's move on to common stock valuation. Let's think about the dividend pattern of some, not all, but some common stock. Some common stock have dividends that rise by a certain amount each year. We might look at the past and say, okay, Ford Motor Company, every year, maybe not perfectly, but approximately or on average, every year the dividend goes up by about 2%. So we'd say G for growth rate is 2%. So for example, if this year's dividend's $1, next year's going to be $1 too. And we make a point of this because in the formula for the price of the stock this year, we don't need this year's dividend, we need next year's dividend. So if this is the case, we're going to use the model on the next slide. In other words, if we have a stock that we see historically, the dividend goes up by like the same percentage each year, or at least on average, like 2%, we can use that to value a stock. The dividend this year is $3. Notice that's DO, that's this year. To get used to thinking DO, what's the D mean? It means this current year. This year's dividend is $3. I'm expecting the dividend to go up by 2% per year. So next year, what, it'll be like $3.06, 3.06. The required return on the stock is 9%. So how am I going to find the present value of receiving those dividends that are going to go up every year by 2%? Show me the math, show me the formula. So note, if DO equals 3 and G equals 2%, then D1, next year's dividend, that's what the model's going to need, next year's dividend, so we're going to have to calculate that, is 3.06. And that's the model. PO, which is the price of the stock now, equals D1. Notice it's not DO, it's next year's dividend. The dividend's a year ahead of the price that we're going for, divided by RS minus G. So up in the numerator, I took $3, this year's dividend, times 1.02. You could write on there, that's D1, or think of that as D1. Make a note of that. $3 times 1.02 is D1. D next year. 1 means the first year, a year from now. And then you're going to divide it by RS minus G, which is 0.09 minus 0.02, which is 0.07. So I take $3.06 divided by 0.07, and you get $43.71. Notice that determining the price now, PO, depends on next year's dividend. In other words, the dividend is 1 year ahead of the price. Let's determine the value of a stock in 1 year. In other words, if DO equals if PO depends on D1, P1 must depend on D2. We need the dividend 2 years from now to find the price 1 year from now, price of the stock. So look at that. P1 equals D2 divided by RS minus G. Well, DO is $3, so I'm going to have to multiply that by 1.02 to the second power to get to D2. So $3 times 1.02 to the second power is D2. So when I continue on with the math, I get $44.59. That's the value of the stock next year. That's what I believe the stock will be selling for 1 year from today. P1 equals D2 divided by RS minus G. So what was it selling for? A year ago, it was selling for $43.71. And this year, or the next year, it's going to sell for $44.59. So by what percentage did the stock price rise during the year? And so I take $44.59, that's the price now, that's D1, I'm sorry, that's P1, and divide it by P0, that's the price last year, or the, right now, and that's from the last slide, and subtract your 1, you get 2%. You get 0.02, which is 2%. Now, isn't that interesting? The price of the stock year to year has risen by the same growth rate as the dividend, and that's not a coincidence. If the dividend growth rate is 2%, we expect that stock to appreciate in value each year by 2%. And so what I've done, you could do with the remaining of the class time, is you could try a couple of these. One, how much should a preferred stock sell for given it pays a $4.50 dividend each year and that its required return is 11%? And two, how much should a common stock sell for right now? Its dividend this year is $2, and this dividend is expected to grow at a rate of 5% annually, and you feel, in other words, your required return for that stock is 12%. When you're done, the answers are right here, and you could scroll back and forth to take a look, or fast forward and so on. In any event, I hope that was helpful, and when we come back, we'll be going much further into stock valuation, but that was a good introduction. Thank you.